Picture a hillside in the eastern Mediterranean, somewhere between what we now call Syria and Crete, roughly 6,000 years ago. The sun is unforgiving, the soil is thin and stony, and most plants have long since given up trying to grow there. But one tree hasn't given up. It's gnarled, slow-growing, almost stubborn in the way it clings to cracks in the limestone. Its fruit is small, bitter, and honestly not very appetizing raw. And yet, somehow, a group of early farmers looked at this unpromising shrub and thought, "There's something here worth keeping." That tree was the wild olive, Olea europea, and the people who first began cultivating it had no idea they were setting in motion one of the longest-running relationships between humans and a single plant species in all of history. We're talking about a partnership that has now lasted longer than writing itself, longer than the wheel's widespread use, longer than most religions we know today. Why did anyone bother? The olive isn't an obvious candidate for domestication. Unlike wheat or barley, you can't just eat it off the branch and get on with your day. Raw olives are so bitter they're almost unpalatable, packed with a compound called oleuropein that makes your mouth pucker in protest. Whoever figured out that crushing these bitter little fruits and squeezing out their oil would produce something valuable did something remarkable. They looked past the obvious and found the hidden gift. Archaeologists have traced the earliest evidence of deliberate olive oil production to the Levant and Crete, somewhere between 4000 and 3000 BCE. We found stone presses, storage vessels caked with ancient oil residue, and charred olive pits in early settlement layers that tell us this wasn't a random discovery. It was a slow, patient process of trial and improvement, generation after generation, tree after tree. Here's what makes the olive different from almost every other crop humans have domesticated. It takes patience most of us can barely imagine today. A newly planted olive tree won't produce a meaningful harvest for 5 to 8 years. It won't hit its stride for 20, and it can keep producing faithfully for centuries. Some trees still bearing fruit today are believed to be over 1,000 years old, with a few claimed to be pushing 2,000 or more. When someone in the ancient world planted an olive grove, they weren't planting it for themselves. They were planting it for their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren. Think about what that says about the people who first spread olive cultivation across the Mediterranean basin. This wasn't a hunter-gatherer grabbing a quick meal. This was a civilization-building decision, an act of faith in the future. You don't invest a decade of waiting in a tree unless you're planning to stay put. Unless you've decided that this piece of land is now home. Unless you believe your community has a future worth planting for. And that's really the heart of this story. Olive oil isn't just a cooking ingredient or a health fad ingredient you see stocked on supermarket shelves today. It is, in a very real sense, one of the oldest physical proofs we have that humans decided to settle down, take root, and build something permanent. Every ancient olive grove was a bet on tomorrow. By the time we reached the Bronze Age, olive cultivation had spread across Crete, mainland Greece, Cyprus, and the Levantine coast. Small communities were pressing oil not just to eat, but to trade, to light their homes, to anoint their bodies, and eventually to build entire economies around. The wild, bitter little tree from the rocky hillside was about to become something far bigger than anyone who first tasted its fruit could have imagined. In the next chapter, we'll travel to Bronze Age Crete, where a civilization we call the Minoans took this humble tree and turned it into the foundation of the first great oil-powered economy the world had ever seen, literally storing their wealth in giant clay jars of golden oil. If you sail into the ruins of Knossos on Crete today, you'll find yourself walking through corridors lined with enormous clay jars called pithoi, some of them tall enough to hide a grown adult standing upright. These weren't decorative. They were the Bronze Age equivalent of a bank vault, and what they stored in staggering quantities was olive oil. The Minoan civilization, which flourished on Crete from roughly 2700 to 1450 BCE, built something that historians now recognize as one of the first economies in human history to run on a single agricultural product the way modern economies run on oil in the petroleum sense. Olive oil wasn't a side dish for the Minoans. It was the engine. Consider the sheer logistics involved. Archaeologists estimate that the storage magazines at Knossos alone could hold hundreds of thousands of liters of olive oil at any given time. That's not a farmer's surplus tucked away for winter. That's a centralized, palace-controlled system of production, taxation, storage, and redistribution. Essentially an ancient supply chain with the palace sitting at its center like a spider managing every strand of its web. Clay tablets written in the script we call Linear B, once painstakingly deciphered in the 20th century, reveal something fascinating. Meticulous records of oil production, oil rationing, oil owed in taxes, and oil sent out as payment to workers. Scribes tracked exactly how many jars of oil moved in and out of palace storerooms with the same seriousness that a modern accountant might track a company's cash flow. This was bureaucracy in service of a single, humble fruit. Why did oil matter so much? Partly because it was endlessly versatile in a way few other products of the ancient world could match. The Minoans cooked with it, yes, but they also burned it in lamps to light their homes through dark Mediterranean nights. They rubbed it on their skin as a cosmetic and a protective balm against sun and wind. They used it in religious rituals, pouring it out as libations to gods whose names have mostly been lost to time. And critically, they traded it, shipping it in distinctive stirrup jars to Egypt, to the Levant, to mainland Greece, exchanging Cretan oil for Egyptian grain, Levantine timber, and precious metals from further afield. This is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating. Olive oil gave the Minoans something that raw grain or livestock never could. It was a product that didn't spoil quickly, that concentrated enormous value into a small, transportable volume, and that could be measured, taxed, and traded with precision. In many ways, oil functioned like an early form of currency. A jar of oil had recognized worth. Everyone from Crete to Egypt understood roughly what it was worth in exchange. Some historians even argue that Crete's famous naval power, the source of what later Greek writers called Minoan thalassocracy, sea dominance, was built substantially on the back of this oil trade. Ships loaded with amphorae of Cretan oil sailed to distant ports, returning with the wealth and materials that allowed Minoan palaces to grow larger, their frescoes more elaborate, their societies more stratified and complex. Then, around 1450 BCE, most of the great Minoan palaces were destroyed, likely through some combination of earthquake, volcanic fallout from the eruption of Thera, and possibly conquest by Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland. The Minoan civilization as a distinct culture faded. But the model they built, an economy organized around the patient cultivation, careful storage, and far-flung trade of olive oil, did not disappear with them. It migrated northward into the hands of the mainland Greeks, who would take this same golden liquid and weave it so deeply into their culture, their religion, and their national identity that even today, thousands of years later, we still associate the olive branch with peace, with victory, and with the very idea of Greece itself. That transformation from Minoan storeroom commodity to the sacred oil of Athena is where our story goes next. There's an old story the Athenians loved to tell about how their city got its name. The god Poseidon and the goddess Athena were said to be competing for the honor of becoming the patron deity of a young, unnamed city on the coast of Attica. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and produced a spring of water, dramatic, powerful, but salty and undrinkable. Athena, by contrast, simply planted a tree. It was an olive tree, and the people, weighing a flashy but useless gift against a modest but endlessly useful one, chose Athena. The city took her name. Athens was born, according to legend, from an olive tree. Whether or not you take that myth literally, It tells you everything about how central the olive had become to Greek identity by the time these stories were being passed down. The Greeks didn't just use olive oil. They built a cosmology around it. They made it sacred. By the classical period, roughly the 5th century BCE, olive oil had become so woven into daily Greek life that it's hard to overstate its presence. It was the primary cooking fat, yes, but it was also the fuel that lit oil lamps in homes and temples across the Greek world. It was rubbed onto the bodies of athletes before they competed, and scraped off afterward with a curved tool called a strigil, mixed with sweat and dust into a substance ancient Greeks believed had medicinal and even magical properties. Wrestlers, runners, and boxers coated themselves in oil before stepping into the ring or onto the track, a practice so standard that anointing and training became almost synonymous concepts in Greek athletic culture. And then there's the story of the Panathenaic Games and the ancient Olympics, where the connection between olive oil and glory reached its most literal expression. Victors at the ancient Olympic Games, held at Olympia in honor of Zeus, were crowned with wreaths cut from a sacred wild olive tree said to grow near the temple. But at the Panathenaic Games in Athens, the prizes were even more direct. Victorious athletes received enormous ceramic vessels called Panathenaic amphorae, filled with olive oil pressed from trees on land, sacred to Athena. We're not talking about a small souvenir bottle. Some victors could receive dozens of these amphorae, each holding tens of liters of prime oil. Enough oil, in economic terms, to represent genuine, life-changing wealth. A champion at these games didn't just win glory. He won a small fortune in liquid gold, oil he could sell, trade, or use to support his household for years. The Athenian state took the cultivation of sacred olive trees so seriously that laws were written specifically to protect them. According to the Athenian orator and statesman Solon, whose reforms in the 6th century BCE shaped much of Athenian law, it was illegal to uproot more than a certain number of olive trees from one's own property in a given year, and destroying a sacred olive, one of the trees believed to be descended from Athena's original gift, could carry severe penalties. This wasn't just agricultural policy. It was a form of religious law because in the Greek mind, damaging an olive tree was tantamount to disrespecting the goddess herself. Olive oil also flowed through Greek trade networks in extraordinary volume. Athenian potters produced thousands upon thousands of distinctive amphorae, specifically designed to transport oil by sea, and Greek merchant ships carried these vessels to colonies and trading partners scattered from the Black Sea to southern Italy to North Africa. Wherever Greek culture spread, through colonization, trade, or conquest, the olive tree and its oil went too, sometimes taking root in soil thousands of miles from where the tradition first began. By the time Alexander the Great's armies were marching east into Persia and beyond, they carried with them a culture in which olive oil wasn't merely a foodstuff. It was a marker of Greek civilization itself, a substance so entangled with religion, athletics, economy, and identity that wherever Greeks settled, olive groves inevitably followed, carrying a piece of Athena's gift into new and distant lands. There's something worth pausing on before we move further west toward Rome. The strange, almost universal instinct across ancient cultures to treat olive oil not just as a commodity, but as something sacred, something that touched the divine. This wasn't unique to the Greeks. It shows up again and again in different civilizations in ways that suggest people everywhere sensed that this particular substance carried a weight beyond its practical uses. Consider the Hebrew Bible, where olive oil appears not as a background detail but as a central symbol running through the entire text. Priests were anointed with it. Kings were anointed with it. The very act of becoming king, in the ancient Israelite tradition, involved having sacred oil poured over the head, a ritual so central that the Hebrew word Mashiach, meaning anointed one, gives us the English word Messiah. Think about that for a moment. One of the most consequential religious and theological concepts in Western history is, at its linguistic root, tied directly to the act of pouring olive oil on someone's head. The famous story of the menorah in the Jewish tradition, later commemorated in the festival of Hanukkah, revolves entirely around olive oil. The account of a small jar of pure oil, expected to last only a single day, miraculously burning for 8. Whether read as history or legend, the story only makes emotional sense in a culture where olive oil for the temple lamp was understood as something precious, scarce, and worth a miracle to preserve. Move over to ancient Egypt, and while olive trees didn't grow as abundantly along the Nile, the Egyptians imported oil eagerly from Crete and the Levant, valuing it highly enough to include jars of it among the grave goods buried with pharaohs, intended to accompany them into the afterlife. Tutankhamun's tomb, when opened in the 20th century, contained storage vessels that once held oils and unguents, some evidently imported at considerable expense and effort, showing just how far a ruler's reach extended in pursuit of this valued substance, even in a land where the olive tree itself struggled to grow. In Mesopotamia, texts and archaeological finds suggest oil, whether from olives or other sources, played a role in anointing rituals tied to kingship and religious ceremony as well, reinforcing a pattern we see across the ancient Near East and Mediterranean. Oil as a substance that marks a transition, a consecration, a moment where something ordinary becomes something set apart. Why olive oil specifically and not some other liquid? Part of the answer is practical. Unlike water, oil doesn't evaporate quickly, doesn't freeze, and has a long shelf life when stored properly, meaning a temple or palace could keep it in reserve for ceremonial use across years or even generations. Part of the answer is sensory. Oil catches and reflects light in a way water never does. Poured over skin or hair, it produces a visible sheen that ancient audiences likely read as radiance, almost a physical manifestation of blessing or favor. And part of the answer, frankly, may simply be scarcity and labor. Producing good olive oil required years of patient cultivation and considerable manual effort at harvest and pressing, meaning that unlike, say, well water, it represented real, accumulated human investment, a gift that cost something to give. This sacred dimension didn't stay confined to temples and coronations. It filtered down into everyday domestic ritual too. Households across the ancient Mediterranean kept small oil lamps burning in honor of household gods or ancestors. Guests were often welcomed with a ritual anointing of the feet or hands, a practical gesture of hospitality, since oil soothed skin cracked by dusty roads and sandaled travel. That also carried symbolic weight, a small act of honoring a visitor as one might honor the divine. By the time Rome rose to dominance across the Mediterranean basin, it inherited not just olive cultivation techniques from the Greeks and Phoenicians, but this entire accumulated cultural weight. Oil as sacred, oil as valuable, oil as a marker of status and blessing. What Rome would do next, however, was something genuinely new. It would take this ancient, semi-mystical substance and turn it into the backbone of an imperial economy on a scale the ancient world had never seen. If you visit Rome today and know where to look, you can still find a hill that isn't really a hill at all. It's called Monte Testaccio, and beneath its grassy slopes lies an estimated 53 million broken amphorae. Ancient shipping containers, almost all of them once used to transport olive oil from the province of Hispania, modern-day Spain, into the heart of the Roman Empire. This isn't a natural hill. It's a mountain of ancient garbage, built up over roughly 2.5 centuries, one shattered oil jar at a time. And it might be the single most staggering physical monument to just how much olive oil an empire can consume. Rome didn't invent olive cultivation, but it industrialized it on a scale the ancient world had never witnessed. As Roman power expanded across the Mediterranean, provinces like Baetica in southern Spain, along with North Africa and parts of Italy itself, were transformed into vast olive-growing regions. their economies reoriented almost entirely around feeding the insatiable appetite of the capital and, eventually, the legions stationed at the empire's furthest frontiers. The logistics behind this were genuinely staggering for the ancient world. Oil pressed in Spanish estates was packed into distinctive amphorae, marked with painted inscriptions recording the producer, the shipper, the weight, and sometimes even the official who had inspected the batch for quality and taxation purposes, an ancient supply chain paper trail not unlike a modern shipping manifest. These jars were loaded onto ships, sailed across the western Mediterranean, up the Tiber River, and unloaded at Rome's river port, where the oil was decanted into other containers for distribution and the empty amphorae, no longer useful and too greasy to safely repurpose, were simply broken and stacked, layer after layer, year after year, eventually forming the hill we see today. Why did Rome need so much oil? Partly for the same reasons every Mediterranean culture before it had needed oil: cooking, lighting, bathing, and religious ritual. Roman bathhouses, those enormous public complexes that were as much social clubs as they were places to get clean, used olive oil extensively. Bathers would coat their skin in oil and then scrape it off with a strigil, much as Greek athletes had done centuries before, removing dirt, sweat, and dead skin in the process. With bathhouses operating in nearly every city across the empire, from Britain to Syria, the aggregate demand for oil used purely in personal hygiene was enormous. But Rome also needed oil for something the Greeks and Minoans never had to worry about at anywhere near the same scale: supplying a professional standing army stretched across 3 continents. Roman legionaries received olive oil as part of their standard rations, using it both as a cooking fat and, when mixed with a bit of vinegar into a drink called pasca, as a staple part of a soldier's daily sustenance on long marches. Military logistics experts within the Roman state had to calculate with real precision how much oil needed to move from producing provinces to frontier garrisons in Germania, Britain, or the Syrian desert, and get it there before it spoiled or ran out, an ancient exercise in supply chain management that modern military logisticians would recognize instantly. The economic scale of all this created enormous fortunes. Landowners in Boeotia who controlled productive olive estates became some of the wealthiest men in the empire, their fortunes built entirely on trees that, as we discussed back in Chapter 1, take a decade or more to reach full productivity. This meant that oil wealth in Rome, much like oil wealth today, tended to concentrate among established families who had inherited productive groves rather than ambitious newcomers trying to break into the trade. An ancient pattern of entrenched wealth that should feel oddly familiar to modern observers of resource-based economies. The Roman state itself recognized how strategically vital this oil supply had become. Emperors organized public distributions of free or subsidized oil to the population of Rome, not entirely unlike the famous grain dole, understanding that keeping the city's population supplied with basic necessities, oil very much included, was essential to political stability. An empire, it turns out, runs not just on grain and soldiers, but quite literally on oil. A lesson that would echo with a very different substance many centuries later in the modern industrial world. For thousands of years, olive oil has been far more than something poured into a pan. It has lit homes, healed wounds, blessed kings, supported empires, crossed oceans, and connected generations through food, faith, and trade. From the first farmers who carefully tended wild olive trees to the millions of people who use it every day, its story is really the story of human civilization itself. The next time you see a bottle of olive oil, remember that you're looking at a tradition that has survived wars, kingdoms, and the rise and fall of great empires. Few things from the ancient world remain such a meaningful part of everyday life. Olive oil does, and that is what truly makes it liquid gold. Now, if you have not subscribed yet, do well to subscribe so that you will not miss any of our new update. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.